I want to tell you something about Japan that the tourism boards don't put in the brochures. There are towns in Japan right now where the last few residents are still living, still going to the grocery store, still locking their doors at night, surrounded on every side by empty houses. These houses were not abandoned in some distant past. They were empty last year. They were empty last month. The neighbors died. Nobody replaced them. What makes this different from any other ghost town story is not the emptiness. It is what the Japanese government knows about that emptiness and what it has chosen not to say. Japan has an official name for towns like this. It is called Kaso. Kaso means a town that is losing its people faster than any government program has been able to stop. Close to half of all towns in Japan carry that designation right now. The government publishes the list every year. What the government does not publish is the internal projection, the one that shows which towns on that list are already past the point where being on the list makes any difference. That document exists. It has not been released. 13 towns are on this video. All of them have been silenced in the same way, not by disaster, not by accident, but by a process so quiet and so deliberate that most people in Japan have never heard these places named out loud. Number 13. In Nagoro, a small mountain village in Tokushima Prefecture on the island of Shikoku, a woman named Tsukimi Ayano has been replacing every resident who leaves or dies with a life-size scarecrow she sews by hand. She places them at the person's last known address. A farmer gets a scarecrow in the field where he worked. A schoolchild gets one at the desk. The teacher who moved to the city has a replacement at the front of the classroom, pointer resting against the chalkboard. There are now more than 350 scarecrows in Nagoro. There are approximately 30 living residents. The ratio crossed over years ago. Nagoro's population in the 1950s was around 300 people. Each decade since, residents left for the cities and did not return. The school closed when enrollment dropped below the minimum required to keep it running. Tsukimi placed scarecrows in every seat. The attendance board is still on the wall beside the door. The lunch menu from the final week is still chalked on the board inside. Japan's National Population Registry tracks registered households, not verified living occupants. Nagoro appears in official data as a community with active registered addresses. The scarecrows are not in the count. Only Tsukimi knows the real number, and she keeps adding to both. Number 12. In 1961, a Japanese businessman named Kunizo Matsuo opened an amusement park in Nara after traveling to California, visiting Disneyland, and deciding to reproduce it. The reproduction was thorough enough that aerial photographs of the two parks are sometimes labeled incorrectly. There was a Matterhorn, there was a Main Street, there was a castle, a Tomorrowland, a gondola. The park ran for 45 years before closing in August 2006, when it could no longer compete with Universal Studios Japan and Tokyo Disneyland. What followed is the part that qualifies Nara Dreamland for this list. The park sat intact and unattended for 10 years. The roller coaster remained on its track. The gondola cars were still attached to their cable. The themed facades, the queue barriers, the staff lockers in the service areas stayed where they were, maintained by no one, while a sequence of bankruptcy proceedings and competing land title claims made demolition legally impractical. No single party had clear legal authority to authorize it, so nobody did. Partial demolition began in 2016. The last major structures came down in 2020. The crews that entered the buildings found 14 years of undisturbed contents. The last maintenance log for the roller coaster was dated August 2006. Everything. After that date is a blank. Number 11. Kijima Kogen was a mid-scale amusement park in the mountains of Oita Prefecture, open since 1957. In March 2020, it closed for the COVID-19 emergency. It has not reopened. The closure has not been officially announced. The operating company lists Kijima Kogen as suspended, pending review. That review has been pending for 5 years. The carousel is still on site, horses in position. The roller coaster is still on its track. The ghost train is in its building, doors closed. Queue rails set for visitors who have not come since the last family left in March 2020. A formal closure declaration triggers environmental assessment and demolition obligations under Japanese commercial property law. The parent company has not budgeted for either, so the review continues to pend. The park's own website still describes it as temporarily closed. Number 10. Ayukawa Hama is a fishing town on the tip of the Oshika Peninsula in Miyagi Prefecture. For most of its modern history, it was also Japan's primary onshore whaling port, one of the few places in the world where commercial whaling formed the complete economic foundation of a community. The infrastructure included processing facilities, canning operations, and a supply chain that employed hundreds of families across the peninsula. The town existed because whaling existed. In 1986, the International Whaling Commission issued its moratorium on commercial whaling. Japan contested the ruling and continued operations under a scientific research designation. But the commercial infrastructure at Ayukawa, the processing plants, the cold storage, the industrial equipment, was never rebuilt to commercial scale during the moratorium period. The workforce dispersed. Japan formally resumed limited commercial whaling in 2019. The official government position is that the industry is recovering. The processing plant near Ayukawa's harbor is still standing. A company name is stenciled on the exterior wall. The telephone number listed below that name has been disconnected since 2006. Number 9. Akabira, Hokkaido Prefecture, had approximately 80,000 residents at its peak in the late 1950s. It was one of the primary coal-producing cities on the island, and the coal built everything in it. Between 1960 and 1994, its 4 operating mines closed one by one as imported coal from Australia and Indonesia undercut domestic production at prices the Hokkaido operations could not match. The last mine closed in 1994. Akabira's current population is under 9,000 and declining by roughly 500 people per year. The main commercial district, the Honmachi Shopping Arcade, was designed and built to serve 80,000 residents. It is still the same length. The roof is intact. The closure rate among storefronts now exceeds 90%. The arcade takes the same amount of time to walk through that it always did. The experience of walking through it is not the same. Japan's coal transition subsidies, administered through a series of rationalization policies from the 1960s onward, were directed primarily to the mining companies. Workers received transition payments calculated against wage structures from the early 1970s that have not been revised since. Akabira has formal KESO designation. Its annual revitalization allocation is roughly equivalent to running a modest restaurant chain for 12 months. Number 8. Tsushima is a Japanese island in the Korea Strait, roughly 50 miles, or about 80 kilometers, from the South Korean coast. It is closer to Busan than to any Japanese city. The island's fishing communities were its economic foundation for centuries. Today, Tsushima has dozens of completely abandoned fishing villages, structures standing, equipment in the buildings, and in at least 3 harbor communities, boats still tied to the dock. The boats were not stored away for the season. They were tied to the dock, as if the fishermen intended to return. The depopulation of Tsushima's coastal villages happened across the 1980s and 1990s, as fishing yields declined and the younger population left for mainland employment. There was no single event that caused it, only a slow arithmetic of departures, until the number of people who stayed was no longer enough to maintain what had been built around them. Approximately 70% of Tsushima's current visitors are South Korean. The abandoned fishing villages are extensively documented in Korean media and by Korean tourists. They do not appear in Japanese domestic tourism materials about the island. Japan's official Tsushima tourism content emphasizes the island's role in repelling the Mongol invasions of the 13th century. Number 7. In the mountains of Iwate Prefecture, at an elevation of roughly 4,000 feet, or about 1,200 meters above sea level, there is a cluster of concrete apartment towers. At its peak, the Matsuo sulfur mining operation housed 5,000 people here, complete with a hospital, a school, a cinema, and the administrative buildings of what was, in the 1950s and the 1960s, the largest sulfur mine in Asia. The mine closed in 1969. The company, Matsuo Mines Limited, was dissolved 3 years later. The settlement emptied within months of the closure. The towers are still standing. The altitude produces heavy mountain fog across much of the year, and the towers rise from it. Photographs of the complex circulate in urban exploration communities internationally. The municipal authority that covers the area, Hachimantai City, carries Kaso designation. Its official tourism materials do not include the towers. This is what Kaso looks like when it happens all at once, rather than across decades. Most Kaso towns drain slowly. Matsuo drained in a year. The company that built it dissolved itself and left. The school still has materials inside. The hospital has not been cleared. The cinema is still there. Nobody came back to collect any of it. Number 6. The Mitsui-Mika coal mine complex in Fukuoka and Kumamoto prefectures was Japan's largest coal mine and one of the most productive in Asia. On November 9, 1963, a coal dust explosion and a subsequent carbon monoxide leak killed 458 miners. It remains Japan's worst industrial disaster. The mine continued operating for another 34 years before closing in 1997. The company town built around the Mike complex housed tens of thousands of workers and their families at peak production. Omuta's population exceeded 200,000. It is now approximately 90,000 and declining. The official disaster memorial is at the mine site. In the residential neighborhoods immediately surrounding the mine entrance, housing blocks built specifically for the mining workforce are still standing. Some are partially occupied. The unoccupied units are not being demolished because demolition costs exceed the assessed property value of the structures. On some floors of those buildings, occupied apartments and empty apartments share the same corridor. In the buildings where the last miners' families still live, the empty units outnumber the occupied ones. The ratio is familiar. Number 5. The Sado gold mine on Sado Island in the Sea of Japan off Niigata Prefecture operated for approximately 380 years, from 1601 to 1989. At its 17th century peak, it was the largest gold and silver mine in the world. A company settlement developed around it over centuries of operation. When the mine closed in 1989, the settlement emptied. Japan submitted the Sado mine for designation as a World Heritage Site by the United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization, which was approved in 2024. South Korea formally objected throughout the process on the basis that the site used Korean forced laborers during the Second World War, a fact the Japanese government initially declined to include in its submitted materials. Under sustained international pressure, Japan agreed to incorporate a forced labor acknowledgement into the site's interpretation. The Mine Museum tells the story from 1601. The residential structures where the wartime labor force lived are not part of the designated heritage zone. They are on the same property. They are accessible. They do not have signs explaining what they were or who occupied them during the years between Japan's annexation of Korea and its surrender in 1945. Number 4. Oshima is a small island in the Seto Inland Sea, administered by Kagawa Prefecture. From 1909 to 1996, it operated as a mandatory quarantine facility for patients with Hansen's disease, which is leprosy. Patients were sent to the island under legal compulsion and prohibited from leaving. This prohibition was not informal policy. It was written into statute. Japan's leprosy prevention law enforced compulsory institutionalization and remained in force until 1996, 20 years after the disease had become routinely treatable for the general population, and decades after the medical case for quarantine had ceased to exist. Patients who arrived on Oshima in the 1940s were still there when the law was repealed. Some had been on the island for 40 years. Several, when they were finally permitted to leave, chose not to. The mainland they had been legally barred from visiting had changed entirely in the decades they were not allowed to see it. The island was where they knew people. The island was where people they had known were buried. Keiso, applied to Oshima, names something different from what it names anywhere else on this list. The depopulation of Oshima was not economic. It was not demographic drift. It was enforced by statute and sustained for almost a century. The island's current population is under 60 people. Japan issued a formal apology in 1996. The compensation process was not completed until 2019. Number 3. In November 1944, as Allied air raids on Japanese cities intensified, the imperial government began construction of a massive underground facility in the mountains outside the town of Matsushiro in Nagano Prefecture. Its purpose was the full relocation of the Japanese state. The emperor, the military high command, Japan's national broadcasting network, and the complete administrative machinery of the government were to move underground. The facility was built to operational readiness. Construction was carried out primarily by Korean forced laborers. Estimates placed the workforce at between 6,000 and 7,000 workers over approximately 10 months. The tunnel network runs roughly 6 miles, or about 10 kilometers, through the mountain. Japan surrendered in August 1945. The emperor never used the facility. The rooms prepared for the imperial household were sealed when the war ended and have not been publicly opened since. Parts of the Matsushiro complex are available for guided tours today. Other parts are not. The sections used by the Japan Meteorological Agency for seismic monitoring are classified. The full extent of the tunnel network has not been publicly disclosed. The memorial at the site commemorating the Korean labor force was placed in 1995 by Korean-Japanese community organizations. It is not on the main tour route. The government did not place it. Number 2. The Haikyo copper mine in the mountains of Tochigi Prefecture opened in 1610. Under the Furukawa Company, which acquired it in 1877, it became one of the largest copper mines in Asia and a cornerstone of Japan's Meiji-era industrial expansion. Beginning in the 1880s, the mine also produced what became one of the worst industrial pollution disasters in Japanese history. Waste from the smelting operations entered the Watare's river system and spread through the downstream watershed, destroying farmland across a wide band of the Kanto region and eliminating the livelihoods of farming communities across multiple prefectures. The government's initial response was to dismiss the farmers' complaints. A politician named Shozo Tanaka, elected in the very first session of Japan's parliament in 1890, spent more than a decade documenting the damage and demanding government action. In December 1901, he resigned his parliamentary seat to petition the emperor directly. The petition was dismissed. The government's eventual solution was to flood the village of Yanakamura, converting it into a flood retention reservoir and relocating the remaining residents by force. Yanakamura is now underwater. During drought years, when the water level drops, the outlines of the foundations become visible. The mine operated until 1973. The company's settlement, built above the town of Haikyo, emptied after closure. The pollution remediation work continues in the Watare's watershed. The history of Yanakamura does not appear in standard accounts of Haikyo. The village is under the reservoir. The reservoir is still being used. Number 1. In 2007, Yubari, Hokkaido, became the only municipality in Japanese history to formally declare fiscal bankruptcy. Its peak population in the 1960s was approximately 120,000. The coal mines that built it closed through the 1970s and the 1980s. The city borrowed extensively to replace the lost industry with tourism, a coal mine theme park, a melon festival, a resort hotel, an international film festival that ran from 1990 onward. None of it came close to replacing what the coal had produced. In 2007, Yubari's accumulated debt exceeded its ability to service it. The city declared reconstruction under Japan's local government financial reconstruction law. The government's formal position on Keiso is that the designation identifies municipalities in demographic and economic stress and directs support toward recovery. Yubari is the clearest evidence of what the framework does not reach. The internal government projections of which other Keiso municipalities are on the same trajectory, carrying the same gap between infrastructure liability and tax base, exist inside the relevant ministries. They have not been released. Yubari's population on January 1st, 2025 was 6,502, 100 fewer than the year before. The International Film Festival held its last edition in 2021. The coal mine theme park that opened in 1990 and closed in 2006 is behind a wire fence at the edge of the city. In Nagoro, Tsukimi Ayano is still sewing. In Matsushiro, the sealed rooms have been sealed for 80 years. In Tsushima, the boats are tied to a dock nobody has returned to. Yubari has a fence, a debt it is still paying down, and a number that gets smaller every January. The government knows which cities are next. The Keiso list is published annually. What comes after KSO has only one documented case. You have just watched it.